Letters to the Dead. David Mitchell had worked as a postal carrier in the sleepy town of Brighton Ridge for nearly 15 years. He knew every house, every dog that barked at him, and every face along his route. He was a quiet man, with a gentle smile and a habit of humming to himself as he walked. Most days were the same, and he liked it that way. Then, one chilly October morning, he noticed something strange. David had just reached the end of Sycamore Lane, where a massive, ivy-covered mansion stood at the end of a dead-end road. The place was known to locals as the Old Prescott House, though it had been empty for years. Rumors surrounded the house: a family curse, tragic deaths, all the usual things people say about abandoned places. David didn't believe in ghost stories, but he couldn't deny the house looked like the kind of place that could have one. As he slid the day's mail into the rusty mailbox, he noticed a small pile of envelopes inside, yellowed and dusty. Oddly enough, each one was stamped but never opened. The ink had faded, and the handwriting on them looked like it was done with one of those old fountain pens. The names on the letters were unfamiliar to David, though he knew most of the families in Brighton Ridge. Curious, David took the letters back to his truck, intending to turn them over to his supervisor. But as he examined them, something strange happened. The names seemed to pull at his memory. Though he couldn't place them, they felt eerily familiar, as if he'd heard them whispered somewhere long ago. After his shift ended, he couldn't shake the feeling that he should open them. Something about the old, weathered paper and the names drew him in, like they were waiting for him to unravel a mystery no one else could. Ignoring the nagging voice of caution, he settled in his small kitchen that evening, poured himself a cup of coffee, and opened the first letter. The handwriting was delicate, as if the writer had been afraid to press too hard and mar the paper. It read, "Dear Eliza, I know you're gone, but I can't bear the silence in this house. Every room feels empty without you, and every corner holds a shadow of the life we had. People say I should forget, but how can I when I still feel you here? It's like you left a part of yourself in every room, watching, waiting." David's hands went cold. The letter was so raw, so full of grief that he felt like an intruder. He placed it down and reached for another. "To dearest Annabel, I keep hearing your voice at night. They tell me it's just my mind playing tricks, but I know it's you. I hear you calling, asking me to come find you. I feel as if you're somewhere close, hidden just beyond reach, waiting for me to bring you home."
David glanced at the other letters in the pile, his heart pounding. Each one was addressed to someone who seemed to have disappeared from the Prescott family. Every line was heavy with sorrow, regret, or longing. Each letter ended the same way, a plea to come back, to forgive, to finally find peace. Unable to shake the growing unease, David decided to find out more. The next morning, he visited the town's small library. The librarian, Mrs. Carmichael, was a bit of a local historian, and she knew all the old stories. When he mentioned the Prescott house, she frowned, her eyes narrowing. The Prescotts, they were a troubled family. Lost almost everyone over the years, one after another. People used to say the house itself was cursed, that it trapped people inside. David told her about the letters. Mrs. Carmichael's face went pale. Those letters, some of the Prescott children, they just vanished. They'd go to bed and by morning, they'd be gone, leaving their parents frantic. No one ever found them. The thought sent a chill through David. "So, these letters could be unanswered," she said, her voice a whisper. "Maybe the letters are like a tether, a way to keep their memory alive." David left the library, his mind spinning. That evening, he couldn't resist. He opened another letter, and then another, each one drawing him deeper into the family's tragedy. With each word he read, he felt a growing sadness, like he was carrying a piece of their grief. Days passed, and he became obsessed, visiting the house and reading more letters. And that's when it started happening. He'd see flickers in the corner of his eye, shadows moving in empty rooms, a faint whisper in the dead of night. One evening, as he read a particularly sorrowful letter, he heard a voice, a small, faint voice whisper his name. It was coming from the Prescott house. Compelled, he walked to the mansion, pushing open the heavy, creaking door. The air inside was cold, filled with the scent of dust and decay. But something else hung there too, a sense of presence, of waiting. In the hallway, he saw them figures, faint as mist, standing side by side. They looked like shadows, faces blurred, yet their eyes were filled with the pain and sorrow he'd read about in the letters. They were the lost Prescotts, he realized, still trapped in the house, bound by grief and longing. One of them stepped forward, her face barely visible but her voice soft. "We waited," she whispered, "for someone to hear us." David's heart ached. He realized the letters had been their last cries for help, the only part of them that remained. He took a deep breath and spoke softly, "You're heard now. I'll help you find peace." One by one, he read each letter aloud, his voice breaking as he finished each one. The shadows around him grew fainter, their expressions softening, their burdens lifted. With each letter, the house seemed to grow lighter, the air warmer.
By the time he finished, the figures were gone. The house was silent, finally at peace. David left that night, the weight of the letters lifted from his shoulders. The next morning, he drove past the Prescott house, and to his surprise, it looked different, brighter, as if some invisible shadow had finally lifted. David kept one letter, though, as a reminder. A letter from the youngest child, a simple message that read, "To anyone who finds this, please remember us. Please don't let us be forgotten." And as long as David lived, he never did.